resilience, focus, discipline, courage. Some of the key ingredients in manifesting your vision into a reality. Join me as we delve into what it takes to make your mark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Make Your Mark talk show. Today, I will be your host. My name is Vanessa Spence, and we are sitting here with the wonderful, the lovely Dean Dori Tunstall of OCAD U. I pronounced it right, yeah?
Yes.
Tunstall.
Okay.
Amazing.
Although I think lots of people are beginning to think that my name is Dean. Because everyone introduces me as Dean Dori.
It's like one of those, you know how people, when they get their doctorate, they like to be known as doctor?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But you are a design anthropologist, a writer, researcher. Can we say the first ever Black dean of a faculty of design anywhere in the world?
You can say that.
Let's give a round of applause. You hold a PhD in anthropology, and you have worked in the United States, Australia, and right here in Toronto at the OCAD University. So just give us a little bit of more details on what you do as the dean of the faculty of design.
I always say my job is to create the conditions of possibility for our students to flourish, my faculty to flourish, and do so in a way that they feel like they have the resources they need, which is always a struggle, to have support where they need it. And I think for the students to really understand how the system works so that they can navigate the system with ease.
That's a pretty important job. Because when everyone graduates, you know, they kind of think, oh, I get a job and then I live the rest of my life. But how do they, where do you source these resources?
Well, we do a lot of fundraising. But the thing I've been doing a lot of now is kind of trying to figure out the community win-win. So as the first Black dean, I have a special commitment, I think, to the Black students and Black faculty at OCAD University. Yeah. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last year is really deepening the relationship between OCAD University and the Black communities, in plural.
Yes.
So that our students have that direct engagement so that after they leave OCAD University, they have a network that they can move into. We've established, for example, a partnership with the Black Business Professional Association where we've bought memberships for our students for two reasons. One, the BPPA has lots of bursaries, so they're very important. That's how we provide resources. Yeah, it's connecting through that, but also so that they can begin to engage with a professional network when they graduate, or even before they graduate, as we sort of develop with that. So in that sense, providing the resources is really about how do we connect with the resources outside of OCAD University that are part of the community. But because in many ways, and I say particularly with the Black community, OCAD hasn't had a really deep relationship institutionally. Like we've had amazing faculty like Lillian Allen and Andrea Fatono who has really deep relationships, but institutionally, we haven't had that relationship. A lot of my work is building those connections so that I can develop the resources.
That's amazing. So in 2016, you became the dean. Have you felt any pushback between other communities?
No, because I'm very good at showing up at different events. So I probably, the second community that I had the deepest engagement with is the Indigenous communities.
Okay, yeah.
I've done a sari summer. So I've traveled a lot to India. And so I have a very large collection of saris for a woman who is not of South Asian heritage.
I may have to read your closet because I love saris. They're so wonderful. Yeah.
And so I did a summer where each week I wore a different sari and draped it in different ways. So when I think about I represent BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and POC people.
Yeah.
And so I go to a wide variety of events across those communities, but to the same extent to where there's a lot of people who have focus on Indigenous community. My focus, again, as the most senior Black person at OCAD University, I know I have a special commitment to that community. And the issues of underrepresentation are incredibly important. The issues of, like I said, engagement and finding in some ways their identity as Black designers or artists is really important. So I don't get any pushback from other communities, but I also know that I have to spread myself around to make sure there's that sense of fair representation in some ways.
Right, because you are like the pinnacle of representation for these students. Yeah. So I guess it's a lot of work, but you find it fills you up.
Yeah, I always say I'm not alienated from my labor in the sense of that all the things that I go to, the events that I go to, are things that I would want to go to anyway if I wasn't the dean of the faculty of design. It's just now I have, let's say, I'm actually quite shy and introverted. But because I'm the dean of design and I have to represent, I kind of force myself to be more extroverted in presentation because I know it's important for me to be out there to make those connections, right? And so in that
totally
sense,
understandable.
So it's a lot of work, but I have a lot of community support, both inside OCAD University. The students all, the best way to say it, lift me up.
Oh,
right.
Wonderful.
In the sense of showing their appreciation, in the sense of actively engaging in the relationships that I'm trying to support for them. And so in that sense, it's an easy job in the sense that I'm not doing it alone. I know how meaningful it is. And I know how other people will take on the kind of things that I initiate and move them even further than I can imagine.
And does that all kind of encompass your goal to decolonize? That like everything you said there was just like all encompassing of just decolonizing this curriculum. To give our people a little bit more of a
the way I say it is that like the tragedy of design is that for many of our Black, Indigenous, and POC students is that they actually have to choose between their diverse identities and being a professional designer.
Yes.
And so for me, decolonizing design is to erase that sense of I have to be one or another. And so partly about engaging with community is introducing them to designers and artists who's like, I'm Black as possible. I'm deeply engaged in the community and I'm able to make a living, not just within the community or outside the community. It's about lifting up in some ways the aesthetic traditions that are part of the Black community, the Black diaspora from Africa, and do so in such a way that it is seen as on par with the aesthetic traditions of Europe, which is where a lot of design comes from. So for us, decolonizing is about creating that space where our students can feel they can authentically be themselves and belong in a design program, belong in an art program, and have faculty to help model the way and have mentors inside and outside the institution to help model the way.
So to kind of feel like they don't have to separate the two.
Exactly.
Because they're all one. But sometimes when we're in the school setting or when we're at home, we feel like we have to get rid of one part of ourselves.
But also in industry. So like this January, I gave a talk at the MoMA. And afterwards, and it was basically about how, we need to decolonize design. And afterwards, again, very prominent Black designers came up to me and said, you know what, I actually haven't really thought about the fact that I don't bring myself into my client work. And I'm really thinking about how do I do that, but also be able to retain my clients, right? And so I've been causing a lot of existential crisis as I travel around the world, really, giving presentations about what it means to decolonize design and what does it mean to be a designer who can authentically be themselves in all of their, complexity.
Right. That's amazing. Because you do have to ruffle some feathers in order to get somewhere in life, right? So yeah, we need someone like you to do it for us.
Well, and it's one of those things I'm also realizing, like, I'm in I hate it, it's like a privileged position, but I'm in a position of enough authority and enough safety in the sense of, like, even if I'm not the dean, technically speaking, I'm tenured faculty at OCAD University.
Right.
So there's a way in which I'm realizing that I'm in a position to be more fearless about how I present things, how I represent things, because the repercussions for me are relatively minor in terms of affecting, like my ability to pay my rent or all these other things that then some people feel like they have to be more cautious, and they do have to be more cautious. But I can be a truth teller in a way, because my position as dean, and particularly my position as first Black dean, means that I have to, again, create the conditions for those truths to be told.
Right.
And I have to be fearless in my way of doing so that the next person who comes after me can be as fearless. You know what I mean?
That's wonderful. So wonderful. We need a leader like you to kind of to pave that path, to kind of make it easier for the younger generation to do what we set out to do as well. We are going to take a little bit of a break,
Okay.
But we will be right back.
From a tender age, I recognized that I was not the average girl. I was always opinionated, outspoken, and for the most part, unapologetic. I was born to lead, to inflict positive change, to serve. I was born a leader. Harnessing this internal drive led me to spearheading several businesses while unlocking potential within large organizations in director roles throughout the city. While on this quest, I discovered my love for people and passion for personal development. Throughout my career, I have mentored hundreds of individuals, both personally and professionally, channeling my belief of self-care and with an avid love for fitness. Daily, I nurture my mind, body, and soul, embracing the very act of self-love. I truly do believe that you cannot give what you don't have. With a commitment to living on purpose and within my purpose, my personal mantra is to leave better than I met.
Hello, everyone. We're back with Make Your Mark TV, and we are here with the Dean Dori Tunstall. See, I did it again. Dori Tunstall. So in 2016, you became the first Black dean of faculty, at OCAD University. But you do have a background in design anthropology. So with that, you're trying to use your work as a tool to make values more tangible and apparent to people. See, I did my research. So what values do you hold at a high pedestal?
Well, right now, our main value is decolonization. But I think within that is actually just the notion of respect. Because so much of, let's say, the sense of distance that, let's say, our students might feel from design, in the Toronto context, what they're experiencing is actually a lot of distance from their sense of belonging and identity culturally. That it is the perception of the lack of respect that my ways of being in the world, my ways of seeing the world, engaging in the world would not be accepted. would not be valued. That I think drives a lot of the anxiety and frustration that I would say students as well as faculty and administrators might feel at a place like OCAD University. So for me, the main value is respect. If you have respect, then everything else in terms of, let's say, compassion, everything else in terms of understanding, everything else in terms of how you like love, all those things come when there's a sense of respect, when there's a sense of, when you say that your existence, regardless of how useful it might be to me, is beautiful in and of itself, just for the fact that you exist in all of your diversities and beauties. And that's not just in terms of human relationships, but the relationships we have to nature, the relationships we have to, let's say, the supernatural world, the relationships that we have to everything. And so part of that is that the embodiment of that notion, as I really appreciate. In India, the Jain sort of philosophy, they have this notion of ahimsa. And it's really this notion to do no harm. But in that system, it's not just like we normally say do no harm and we normally mean to other people, but it's like do no harm to microbes. Do no harm, like do not eat garlic and onions because there's microbes on there that you might kill by eating, those foods. When you make something out of silk, use a process that means you don't kill the silkworm because their existence is beautiful in and of itself beyond its utility to us. And so when I think of respect, I also think of that notion of ahimsa. So if you respect something, then you won't do it any harm, right? And if we could just not do harm, I think we would have the solution to, the behavioral and attitudinal solution to all of the things that we do that are deeply, deeply harmful to one another.
Right. I always remember one thing that I feel like it's a grade 2 teacher. She would always say, like, we would always try to touch toys and stuff when she was talking. And she would always say, just let it be, and that has followed me. I just let it be, we just need to have the capacity to let things be. And don't try to change it. Don't try to harm it. Just let it do what it has to do. And if it affects you, if it, directly affects you, then maybe you have some say over what goes on, but just let it be. Just let it be.
It's a good idea. I mean, and a lot of the conversations we've been having around indigenous philosophies and indigenous principles is a lot of those are what's called relational, right? So it's, it's the notion of all my kin that you hear. It's that notion that we have a relationship of obligation to all the other things that exist in the universe. And so, so in that sense, it's that you let it be, let it exist, but you also maintain connection to it, right? That you also seek to nurture it when you can, so that because it's in that act of connection and in that act of nurturing that everything's allowed to flourish.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that's, sun nourishes, water nourishes, the host system nourishes, which allows us to grow and develop. But so it's letting it be, but it's also maintaining that connection. Right. And making sure that connection is a nourishing connection that you're establishing with all things. And what's great about, like, again, design, the work that we do in design, is that we are connected to everything. Everything that is human made is touched in some ways by a designer, which means that connection is already there, but sometimes that connection is not nourishing. It diminishes things instead of allowing it to grow and flourish. And so part of it is changing that mindset around what are you doing with that connection that you've established? What is it that you're doing with what you're making so that everything can flourish by your creation and making of that. And it's a hard thing to teach because it's really, it's like, we just like, I want to make for this particular user.
Right.
Right. And it's like, and I don't want to extend to what impact that's going to have on the cats and the dogs and the trees and the bugs.
Because it's a world of business. You know what I mean? People just have their market and they just
it's going to go up
that market.
Or is it going to go down?
Right.
Is it going to go up or is it going to go down? Right.
So with that value system, what kind of what do people have to negotiate, or what's compromised in order for this generation to live and survive in this world that we live in now?
I think we have to rethink our notion of what is a good life. Mm-hmm. And I say this, like in design, we talk about how we need to separate design from the modernist project, which basically is this notion that through technology, we can all progress, right? But that progress is based on the notion of everyone living like a king, right? So it's like the whole thing about the king and their lifestyle was that it wasn't sustainable. That's why they were always having to like conquer someone or whatever. It was a non-sustainable lifestyle that was highly exploitative. So if everyone is trying to live like a king, which means making things cheaper, making things faster, making things easier,
more easily accessible
to everyone, then that's why we have all of the issues with the environment, because that ideal of what's a good life, that ideal we're seeking to as progress, is based on an aristocratic notion, which in and of itself was unsustainable. So changing our notion of what a good life is. A good life is about the relationships that you have that are nurturing. A good life is having enough, not more, but having enough that you need to be fed and clothed and all those things we need to survive in our environment. Mm-hmm. If we can just scale down our sense of what is enough for us to feel full, both internally as well as sort of physically, then I think we have the basis to change our society and again, engage more respectful, because I don't have to take more. I can actually share with you because I actually have enough. And actually, if I have a little bit more, I may even give you a little bit of extra because I notice you may not have enough, right? But right now we're all like, I want to live like the king. and that's not possible, right? In a way that allows everything else to survive, to flourish.
That's wonderful. Yeah, wonderful.
But it's really hard. It's really, really hard. It's really, really hard for us to wrap our heads around that. Mm-hmm. It's really hard.
I'm going to shift into education, kind of just the schooling, because you have a BA, MA, and a PhD. So I'm kind of guessing that you hold formal education at a high regard. But what do you feel of street smarts and learning from lived experience?
So the thing to understand is, even my PhD is in anthropology, which if you don't understand what anthropology is that you go generally to other places and you talk to people who are living their everyday lives, and they are the experts. So whether you're talking to a 5-year-old or a 95-year-old, everyone that you are encountering is an expert, more of an expert than you are in what it is that you're trying to understand.
Right.
I think I went into anthropology because there's a way in which if you are really successful in the formal education system, that you can get a little arrogant and think you know more than anyone else. And so in anthropology is a great test of humility because, like I said, this 5-year-old that will know more about something that you're trying to understand than you would without, your PhD in that. So for me, generally, I think of like the academic system is really someone has taken street knowledge and written a book about it, and then you're reading secondhand that book.
We are going to stop it there. We're going to take another short break and we'll be right back. Hello, everyone. We are back with Dori Tunstall. On the break, we were talking about education beforehand, but on the break, we were talking about how the MA and PhD has gotten you into certain rooms a bit faster. So can you just explain kind of that and how that has helped you to get to where you are today?
Well, I think it's particularly as a Black woman, there's many situations where I could be like standing on the side or walking into a space and I will be completely invisible. And then normally or it's actually even better if someone else introduces me. It's like, here's Dr. Dori Tunstall. She's an anthropologist. She has her PhD from Stanford. And all of a sudden I can see how I'm now a human being in that person's eye, where I was completely invisible before. All of a sudden, I'm real. And then I have about 10 seconds to see me as fully human. So it's a thing where the value of formal education, and again, I say particularly if you're a Black, Indigenous, POC person, is that it creates space for people to hear you. And I say, specific people to hear you, in the sense that, our social structures are such that if you're not white, if you're not male, if you're not cisgender male, or all these sort of things, that you can be rendered invisible or hyper visible, which is the other, issues. Because I've also had situations where I've come into a room and everyone's like, how can we help you? Do you belong here? Basically the subtext. And someone then say, oh yes, she's our keynote for either for the morning. And then again, that transformation where all of a sudden I become a human being, not just this entity that's disrupted their space. So the PhD, I say higher education is useful, not so much for the learning, and I'll contextualize that because that'll get me in trouble. It's mostly for the social relationships and the social network that you bring. Many things that you learn in formal education is just, you can get the books yourselves. You can, it's like, and there's exercises in them. And normally what you're being assigned is something to do or something to read, which you can do that yourself. But the advantage you have in being formal education is you have a community in which you can do that in. And that's why I always emphasize you'll learn more from your classmates than you will from your professors. And also, again, a network. So particularly in fields like design and art, where in the city of Toronto, OCAD University is 0 degree of separation from any major art and design institution. So automatically you become part of that community and part of that network that if you know how to work it, you have access to. But in the learning itself, you're just getting more practice for learning. But you can do that outside of formal education. Like I said, as an anthropologist, there's a built-in humility to what you do because you realize that everyone else is experts on their lives. And that means you are always the dumbest person in the room, right? And I carry that with me in the sense that I'm trying to understand people, processes, how to make things work, which means I'm always the dumbest person in the room because everyone else is their expert on their experience. Right.
That's a great way to kind of put it. Because it adds humility and it just makes it allows you to open your ears just a little bit wider. But that kind of brings me to the concept of undoing and unlearning, which is something that's so important with this generation and the more mature generation. But can I explain that concept of undoing and unlearning?
Well, I think as we learn, the whole process, for example, that we're doing trying to decolonize design at OCAD University is a process of our learning. Yeah. Because we've learned the Bauhaus is great. We've learned these like white space. It has to be all about the white space. And so part of decolonization is really that unlearning of this is the way in which we've been told to do things. Is that relevant for the context we're in now? And it's like the reason why these kind of changes are so difficult for individuals and institutions is that unlearning is painful, because you may have built some expertise and ego in knowing those things. And so to have your whole world shift and to sort of say, well, there's this other thing here, or to be told in some ways, because that's how it's heard, is like, oh, the way in which you're doing things is bad because it's harmful to people, right? That unlearning process is so deeply it deeply affects your sense of self,
Right.
Because you have to, when you unlearn, you actually have to rebuild yourself from the inside out.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of hard work that many times we're not encouraged to do. We're not supported to do. But it's an important, if you're going to keep learning, if you're going to keep growing, it's the important work that you have to do for yourself, but also for other people. Like the possibilities of change that we have at OCAD is completely related to the fact that our students are so diverse. And let's say my faculty members really care about their students. So when our students say, this hurts me, this way of learning is hurting me, then they'll listen to that and they're willing to unlearn because of the care that they feel for those students, right?
That's wonderful. Because my partner's in architecture or in construction as well. And he always talks about the process of like excavation and how like they just kind of have to like dig deep and then tear out all of that excess concrete or whatever is in there to put something else new in. And that's what I always say is that process takes a lot of work. And there's a lot of people around to kind of support that process. But if you don't have the right people, then, you know, where does that process end? Yeah. Where does that process end?
So a lot of my work, like I would say the hard work that I do as a dean is actually helping the institution to craft the language around that excavation process, right? To sort of say, well, first of all, what is it that we're pulling up and why?
Putting a name on it.
What is it that, what are the things that, like, we don't want to just pull everything up. What are the things that need to remain there as part of the new infrastructure that's being built? How do we want to, quote unquote, catalog and recognize those things? What is it that we need to discard because it's not useful anymore? What is so toxic that we actually have to be very careful about the way in which we discard it? So a lot of the work that I do and have been doing for the last 2.5 years is actually helping the institution craft a language to explain what this excavation process is about. By doing that, helping to relieve the anxiety around that sense of, you're tearing out my soul. It's like, it's okay. We're gonna give you other patches to put in that will actually make you feel better, right?
But first we have to take
this out.
But it's finding the language, but also finding the right people to nurture that process. So you did most of your schooling in the United States and you were born in the United States. And then after that, you worked in Australia. So, and then you came here. So I'm wondering, like, how did you find support systems while you were away from home and while you're still away from home? How do you,
the first assumption is that there was lots of support systems at home, and that may not be such a true assumption.
That's real.
I think I've been very lucky in my choices to find what I call like-hearted people. So in the States, so let's say, for example, I have my PhD from Stanford. And the reason why I ended up going to Stanford was because of two people. First, one person saying to me, this place is really screwed up, which is why we need you. And that honesty about like, because, most of the time when you go get the tour, everyone's like, this is like,
Yeah.
la 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 la, happy land, right? The Disneyfication of the world. So for someone to be that honest about how difficult it is to be in that space, and then the necessity of having you there in order to make it better, like that to me was saying, okay, here's a like-hearted person. Because I think one of the things that I'm quasi noticing about sort of the difference, let's say for me being African American and in being in Blackness in, let's say, the Toronto context, is that like as mother's milk, we are told that we are part of the struggle. So we are told that you're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to break down these barriers because there's these multiple generations of people who have opened the door for you, and your life is easier than your grandmother's and your great grandmother's, and you have to make it easier for everyone. So that is like day zero, right? Understanding about your position. And if you have any talent, whether that's like you're really smart or you're really gifted in one way or another, that you have an obligation and a responsibility to make it better for the next generation. Within that then is that notion of when you come here, or when I come here and other places, that I find those people who have that same understanding.
Right.
So, when I was in Australia, I worked really closely with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, the indigenous communities there, and learned the similarities and differences, but surrounded myself with people who had that same sense of like, we have to make it better for the next generation. Again, even going backwards, like, again, I went to Stanford because there were people there who saying, we have to make it better for the next generation. And the call from OCAD was something for the dean's position was something I've never read. I actually never could imagine that they would call for a dean who helped facilitate the process of decolonization and indigenous vitalization. In Australia, the language around decolonization is very strong. Like I said, I was hanging out with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. So they're all like Black Power. And that's actually a direct dialogue between the African American experiences and, again, the Black Australian experience, because their Blackness is embedded in their indigeneity. So in that sense, the 6.5 years that I spent in Australia helped prepare me to understand how to find and build that same community here in Toronto. And again, I've had amazing introductions. So Lillian Allen, day one, it's like taking me under your wing. Right.
So it's kind of like
Andrea Fatona had dinners like every month to invite me to and introduce me to different people in the community. So my entry into the community has been super supportive and smooth from the very beginning.
Right. So like finding people who you connect with on a more deeper level, more spiritual level, without having to explain
exactly
what it is you're on this earth to do. That's pretty amazing.
And the thing is you find that there's so many, like, again, so it's like 2.5 years. So the first year I was really learning about OCAD and who's doing what at OCAD University and how I could support. And then the last 1.5 years has been me going out all the time to figure out what's going on in the community. And as the more I go out, the more I find like this person is doing this amazing initiative that I should connect with. And so, so it's partly, I think, like I try to radiate that so that people who might be in a room with me can feel that energy and kind of come towards.
Nice. So just like vibrating on a higher level.
Yeah.
To get those people, to connect with those people.
Yeah.
And let's take a short break.
Okay.
But we will be right back. Hello Hello, everyone. We are back on the Make Your Mark Talk Show. We are here with Dean Dori Tunstall. We're going to switch the conversation into more social media talk. So as someone who is an entrepreneur myself, I'm feeling like if I don't have that large presence on social media, then the work that I do is not validated. So how do you kind of navigate that whole thing? Because I know you have a large presence on social media and you do your Dean drag every day and you kind of like show off your outfit and your amazing outfits. So how do you navigate that?
So I first joined Instagram because I realized my students are only on social media, meaning I could email them and they would not respond at all. But I would DM them. I would like a direct message them on Instagram and they would immediately respond. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that, if I'm going to communicate to my students, and then mostly my social media platform is really to communicate with my students, then I need to do it on the platform that they're on. Again, as the first Black and Black female dean of a faculty design anywhere, being able to show my students what the day in the life is of a dean is really important for them to be able to imagine the possibilities of them being in that role, right?
Wonderful.
So again, when I post Dean Drag, hashtag Dean Drag every morning, that it's really about saying, this is how you be a dean in the world. And I try to carry that with a sense of authenticity. This is what a dean does. So I normally put a list of like, okay, I have lots of meetings with my faculty. I'm meeting with a VIP today. The premiere is coming, so I'm suited up and, whatever. So I try to connect how you appear authentically as a leader with what are the kinds of activities that you have to do with a leader so that every student, and I think particularly like my BIPOC female students or non-binary students, can see themselves as a leader. Like, because I dress high and low. So I do have clothes that are made by Haute Couture for important events. But I also have, I wear the Gap. Or again, I have the sari summer, so I wear that. Or I have a lot of African wax print that I have gotten from my travels or gifts from people. So I wear that. So everything that I wear is about an authentic expression of what does it mean to be a leader and what does it mean to be a Black woman as a leader so that all the young people can see what that looks like. And I think that has to do with, again, one of the challenges is how do you have authentic leadership? One of the challenges is how do you be something if you can't see it? And a friend of mine actually said that the coolest thing about my social media presence is that it trains people to think the woman that you are sitting next to in Starbucks coffee, she could be a dean. And you don't know that because, her hair might be in braids and she might be wearing a Haute Couture jacket with Gap pants and you're not paying that much attention, but you should pay attention because you don't know who could be in positions of leadership and influence. And being a dean at OCAD University, I'm surprised by the cultural and social position that role has, especially in the city of Toronto.
And that kind of goes into what we were speaking about earlier in the interview, just the concept of respect, just having respect for everyone. They don't have to look like how a dean should look, but that doesn't mean that they're not one. And that doesn't mean that they should be respected as just a person.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. I was doing, in my research, I was doing some calculating with the number of years that you've been in anthropology. And it's almost up to 30.
Yes.
And being someone who's not even 30 yet.
Ouch.
No disrespect.
Okay, not taken. I've earned every year.
See? Yes, have pride in that. But as someone who is not even 30 yet, it's kind of hard to grasp being in one profession or, studying one thing for that amount of time. So how have you kind of kept the spark in the relationship with your career?
I mean, I've moved a lot.
Yeah.
I've lived on several continents, and I visit several continents. I guess my career is really quite diverse, like in terms of what I've done. So, once I graduated from Stanford, I was expected to become a professor. I actually went into industry. So I went into high-tech consulting, working at places like Sapient and Arc Worldwide, which did the integrated media for Leo Burnett. And then I went back into academia with a sense of trying to take what I learned in industry and make it accessible to people who didn't have to have a PhD, right? The move to Australia was me trying to understand, in some ways, this notion of decolonization. But it was also a career move because I knew I wanted to get more into administration, and I had an opportunity to do so if I moved to Australia, more so than if I stayed in the States. So even though I've been studying anthropology for 30 years, and it seems like that I've been doing the same thing, the reason why I became an anthropologist is that I was interested in everything. But if you say you're interested in everything, people think you're unfocused. So I said, well, I'll study anthropology because I can study anything from like 35,000 before Common Era to tomorrow. And any time and any place in the world, as long as there's human or human-like creatures there, then I can study that and still be under a field, right? To show that I have focus. And that hasn't changed in terms of how I approach things, where I'm interested in almost anything and everything. And I keep moving around to different places and different levels of understanding, let's say an organization, that I never get bored. Like I never get bored.
So for someone who's in a career of like business and they're in an office for 8 hours out of the day, how can they kind of keep that spark alive?
So again, I've worked in an office for 12 hours a day. That's what I did in high-tech consulting. But what keeps, I'm all about like, again, connection and human engagement and even, plant engagement, whatever it is, but it's all about connection. So even when I was working in an office 12 hours a day, 60 hours a week, 60 to 100 hours a week, my work was all about that connection that I had with my colleagues who were some of the brightest people in the world, the connection, because I was meant to talk to people as an anthropologist and figure out like, what is this newfangled thing, the internet, going to be? Like, that's how old it was, right? Like that internet thing, what is that going to do to the way in which we work? Because all of my careers have required that I build connections with people, that it's the connections that keep the spark going. And, and that again ties into the social media presence as well, is that by having the fact that my students can come up to me and say, I love what you're wearing today, right? The fact that they get over the barrier of me being the dean, right, of the faculty of design means that I always have access to that connection. And it is that connection that on the days when I'm in a meeting that is really, really long and really, really painful, that I remember why I'm there, and what is important about me being there to make things better for. When I was working in industry, it's how am I making things better for the customer, or how am I making things better for my colleagues? When it's here, it's now how I'm making things better for my faculty, how am I making things better for my students, how am I making things better for the community? And so the spark for me in my career has always been, I'm going to say, my mission or my intentionality in life has always been about how can I use education, which is just knowing things and learning about things, as a way to build harmonious relationships between people and the things around us. And that hasn't changed. Like my family told me, that hasn't changed since the age of 6.
Wow.
What's has changed is what's the right vehicle or platform to allow me to do that. So in some cases, it's been working in industry, because I worked in industry for 7 or 8 years. In some cases, it's been being in academia. In some places, it's been traveling all around the world to find what is the best institution or the best situation that I can put myself in, so that I can make that intention as real and impactful as possible for other people. And so that the spark comes from that same way of wanting to make meaning and have a meaningful presence in the world that I've had since I was 6. It's then just finding where's the best place in which I can do that. And again, sometimes the conditions change. That's why I've moved a lot. Is that conditions change, and you realize that this place is actually not the best place for me to do that. And so that's a privilege in some ways, that I've been able to move and find the best place for me to flourish. And that the work that I do to have greater meaning.
Beautiful. So just kind of building connections with other humans.
And
that's like,
and
it
plans
seems so simple.
it
seems so simple. So closing question, what is your definition of success in one sentence?
To live a life in which you've built harmonious relationships with everyone and everything.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dori, for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Remember to follow us at makeyourmark.ca on Instagram, and also on our website, www.makeyourmark.ca. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you.